and WebEx. And I'll record them, so.
All right, good morning, everyone, or I guess afternoon now. So my name is, or first off, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, sounds good. So my name is Victoria Massney, and I am an assistant director here in the Center for Career Exploration and Success. So today I will be talking about the job and internship search. So whether your students are first years or even, seniors and juniors, I think it's relevant for all years to start thinking about what that job and internship search looks like. So I'm happy you all are joining me today. Okay, so just to get started, I wanted to go over a little bit of what our office offers. So as you can see from this diagram, we do offer a variety of things through our office. So the first thing is programs and workshops. All of our programs and workshops can be found on our website at miamioh.edu/careers. And I believe Mark will probably share that information with you all at the end of the workshop. But so we offer things like resume workshops, LinkedIn workshops. We do have an interviewing workshop as well that happened earlier in the semester. We do also offer basic interviewing skills, which is actually a required workshop for all of your students to take if they would like to interview with us on campus. And I will go into a little bit later what on-campus interviewing is. But basic interviewing skills is definitely the one workshop that your students will absolutely have to take. So we also offer several programs throughout our office. So we have career exploration webinars, career exploration panels. So not necessarily job search and internship, but certainly those experiences for students will help them meet employers and recruiters and then potentially lead to an internship or a job after that. So the next bubble is reviews, and by reviews, what I mainly mean is LinkedIn and resumes. So we do hold drop-in review hours. So we have career assistants who are undergraduate students who are trained in resume review and LinkedIn review. So your students can come down to our office. They don't need to request an appointment or anything. They can just drop in and have a career assistant review their resume and their LinkedIn profile. We also do offer career coaching, which is our next bubble down at the bottom. So career coaching is a little bit more of that in-depth one-on-one coaching we do with your students. So there are about 5 or 6 career advisors in our office, and each of us are trained in career advising, career coaching. We all hold master's degrees in student affairs or counseling and business as well. So what we do with your students is we can also review resumes, LinkedIn profiles, but we'll do more of the in-depth conversation of what are you looking for in a full-time job? What are you looking for in an internship? How do you go about finding those internships? Helping them make connections with employers. So career coaching is certainly something I highly advise for students to do. And they would do that by logging on to Handshake. And we'll go through what Handshake is in a later slide as well. So with Handshake, they can request an advising appointment. So they will, once they log in, they will see an advisor pop up for them. Depending on their major, depending on what college they're in, they might have an option of a few different advisors, or they might just have one advisor, and they will see the availability of that advisor and be able to match it up with their schedule and schedule that one-on-one appointment. The next bubble is mock interviews. So we do host mock interviews in our space, similar to how a student would go and sign up for a career coaching appointment. They would also sign up for a mock interview. So mock interviews are conducted by, again, trained undergraduate students as well as employers. So these students or these employers are trained in mock interviewing. They go through the entire process with the student. So your student will sign up for a mock interview, and it's typically an hour long. It is video recorded. The actual interview is about 15 to 20 minutes, and then the remaining time is used to critique your student and to help them see, okay, these are the things that you did really well in the interview. Here are some things that you might want to consider. And we also cater it towards that student's major or that student's career interest so that they're getting relevant questions to that field. And the it is videotaped and sent to your students so they can rewatch that afterwards. I know we all have quirks that we sometimes do that we don't realize, so I think for students it's really important, especially if they have not interviewed before, to have that mock interview to see maybe some of the nuances that they're doing. Maybe they're touching their hair while they're talking, things like that. So I've met with a lot of students who have found that to be incredibly beneficial. The next bubble is experiential learning. So we here at Miami are very dedicated to experiential learning. All of your students have to complete a 0 credit hour experiential learning credit in order to graduate. So this can be a variety of things. Certainly internships count towards this, even research opportunities. And we also do host a few things through our office as well. So some of the things that I want to highlight are some of the experiences that we have coming up. So our Career Leap immersion trips. So each year we do a few different trips over the January term. We also had one in August to Cincinnati. The January term trips this year are to San Francisco and Washington, D.C. And both of these registration links we'll send out as well as they are on our website. But through these trips, students will have the opportunity to engage with employers and alumni in both of those cities. The one in San Francisco is more startup, venture capital focused, and then the one in Washington, D.C. is more of, there will be some startup component, but mostly governmental jobs, nonprofits, that kind of focus. And then in January, we're also hosting a job shadow day. So that will be for students to go ahead and shadow employers in the Cincinnati and Columbus area. So if you're from Cincinnati or if your student is choosing to stay in this area over the January term, they can certainly participate in that job shadow day. And then we also have a Startup Cincinnati Day. So Startup Cincy Day is on January 26th. And that is going to be a day where we will actually go down to Cincinnati and meet with several of the startup founders down in that city, as well as other people who work for the incubators and people who work in different capacities of that ecosystem. So the Career Leap trips are really designed to offer your students something to do over the January term. I meet with a lot of students who are incredibly ambitious, first-year students, second-year students who say, I want to do something over January term, how can I find an internship? So yes, while it is about 4 to 5 weeks that your student has that time off, typically employers do not offer internships during that time because for them, 4 weeks is not a long time at all. So I typically tell students to engage in something experiential, to do some networking, informational interviewing, which is also something we'll talk about later on in this webinar, but really helping your students see that it doesn't need to be a structured internship in order for it to be a good experience. And we certainly have also had students do some of the experiential learning, do a mock interview, and then get an experience afterwards. So I actually, through our Career Leap Cincinnati trip, we did mock interviews with the students, and one of the students was actually offered an actual internship from that mock interview. So things like that happen all the time. So sometimes it's more of the non-traditional way to find an internship. And then the last thing to talk about what we offer is our career fairs. So our fall fair kind of kicked everything off back in September. So we had about 300 employers show up to that career fair, thousands of students circle through, really great opportunity for your students to meet a variety of employers. We do also recognize that sometimes that is a very big venue for students, might not be the most comfortable, might not be the most beneficial. So for certain majors and certain areas that we've identified more competitive career paths, as well as less access. So we have a sports management career fair as well, which is called SEEN, and this is going to be hosted on October 20th here on campus. We also have an art, architecture, and design fair that will be held on December 11th. And then in the spring semester, our Spring Internship and Career Expo, better known as Spring ICE, is going to be held on February 22nd. So these are all really amazing opportunities for your students to get in front of employers, get their resumes out. Certainly they're a lot bigger venues, however, does give your student the opportunity to at least go and meet people. So I always get the questions from first year and second year students like, oh, you know, employers don't want to talk to me at career fair because they're just looking for juniors and seniors for internships. Should I even still go? I say absolutely encourage your students to go because if anything, they're getting that experience and they're able to see what a career fair is like, because it is a little bit overwhelming if you just walk into a giant hall of thousands of people. So if for anything, I think it's really important for students to just get that experience and see what they're walking into. Okay, and I know the slide is a little bit overwhelming, but we'll walk through each piece of it. I kind of wanted to just highlight what our recruiting cycle looks like. So it's not going to really be typical every year or really the same every year or for every student. It might look different depending on majors, depending on career fields. For example, the field of accounting typically has a much accelerated timeline, so they're typically done recruiting by October, whereas other industries are not quite as accelerated. So this, in general, is a timeline to follow, but I certainly would encourage your students to meet with a career advisor to talk more about specifics about their industry that they're looking in. So like I mentioned, everything kind of kicks off in the fall with our career fair. So this is our largest career fair held in September. And so with that is kind of when recruiters will start a lot of their heavy recruiting. So they will glean candidates from that career fair as well as host networking events leading up to career fair. So really during the month of September, pretty much when students step foot on campus, recruiters are here doing information sessions, hosting tables, doing lunch and learns, things like that. And so there are both job and internship opportunities at Fall Career Fair. Typically students will ask me like, oh, is it more job focused or more internship? It's really kind of both. Again, depending on the industry, some industries might be hiring more jobs in the fall and then internships in the spring. But I tell students, you know, it's really kind of a mix of both. So then after Fall Career Fair happens, during all of that going on, even prior to Fall Career Fair, I always encourage students to do prep. So resumes, cover letters, and prepping your interview. This is really the time, you know, between August and September is really the time that students want to be making sure that they have their resume set and then have it reviewed by either a career assistant or their career coach. Additionally to that, I also recommend having them swap resumes with their friends or go to their professors and ask them to take a look at it, because I think it helps to have a few different set of eyes on a resume. And because all recruiters are different, so one recruiter might love the resume, one might really hate it. So I think it helps for students to give themselves that time to truly have a few different sets of eyes on it. Cover letters as well, we do offer assistance for that in our office, typically through one-on-one coaching, and then interviewing, so doing a mock interview or doing one of our interviewing webinars, so the basic interviewing skills. So certainly that's all kind of happening kind of earlier in the semester that happened, and it's still kind of going on right now. And then that leads us into fall recruiting. So after career fair, we have two different types of on-campus interviewing. So the first one is the very next day after career fair. So career fair is held in Millett Hall, which is the biggest space on campus that we can have it. And after that career fair, the next day on Thursday morning, employers will actually come back and set up tables to do interviews. So students are invited overnight, basically, to come and interview on campus with the employer who is going to be there. So a lot of employers will opt to do that because some of them come from far away. So they, instead of having to come back and do on-campus interviews or fly out the candidates to them, they will host their first round of interviews the very next day after career fair. A lot of other employers will do what we call on-campus recruiting or on-campus interviewing. So in our space here in Armstrong, we have about 10 interview rooms as well as 2 floors of additional interview rooms. So on any given day, we have, you know, as many as 20 employers in our space sometimes. And so what these employers will do is they will come onto campus, host their first round interviews with your students, and then if they do, some of them will do a second round as well on campus, or their second round will be them actually bringing your student to their site. Students can apply for these fall on-campus recruiting slots on Handshake. And again, we'll talk about Handshake a little bit later. So typically what employers will do is they will post a job on Handshake and then create interview slots. So once the student applies for the job and they are accepted for an interview, the employer will email them and say, hey, you've been accepted for this interview, please go ahead and sign up for an interview time on Handshake. So we see employers doing that a lot here in our space, and it really cuts down on them having to do either a first round where they bring the candidate out there or doing a phone interview. We're seeing a lot more move to doing this on-campus recruiting. So then fall recruiting happens. Say your student is still looking for a job or an internship. Definitely tell them to keep on going, keep on revising resumes, cover letters, working on those interviewing skills. Because then we also do have our spring internship and career expo, which is held in February. So over the January term, I typically recommend to students to do some sort of an experiential learning opportunity, even if it's just networking. So if your student's going to be back home, I encourage them to meet with, a few people that they might be interested in what they do. So then following up into the Spring Internship and Career Expo, again, updating resumes, cover letters, all of that stuff as needed. And then we do also have spring recruiting, which is very similar to on-campus fall recruiting. It's a little bit lighter in the spring, I would say. I would say a lot more employers are moving more towards that fall recruiting just because their timelines are being sped up. They're able to get candidates in a much, with things being online, with different ways that they're meeting candidates, they're able to speed that process up a little bit. But certainly there are still a lot of jobs and internships still available in the spring. Employers have access to Handshake 24/7, so they can post jobs as needed. So sometimes employers come in the fall and don't even know that they will have a full-time position open in the spring, or vice versa with internships. So I always encourage students to continue checking on Handshake, periodically checking, making sure that there's not anything that they're missing on there. And then spring recruiting happens. Hopefully that results in a job offer for your student or an internship offer. And then if they do an internship over the summer, then that cycle starts all over again for them in the fall. So that's kind of just a brief overview of what the recruiting timeline looks like. Again, it's different for different industries. Some are a little bit more accelerated, so I definitely encourage your student to meet one-on-one with a career advisor. Okay, and then this next slide, I wanted to touch on our offer acceptance policies. So we really have these in place so that students are protected, because what will happen oftentimes is employers will give a student an offer and then want a very quick turnaround on an answer. And all the students here at Miami are incredibly bright and intelligent and have amazing opportunities. So we're seeing a lot of students feeling very pressured to accept the first offer, which we don't at all want your students to feel like, oh, I can't even pursue other opportunities or go to another interview because I have to accept this offer. So there are two different offer acceptance policies. So the one in our Career Center is a little bit different than the one in Farmer School of Business. So I'll touch on the Career Center policy first. So any employer who recruits with us, they have agreed, they have signed something with us that says that they must keep that offer open for at least 3 weeks. Sometimes employers will keep them open longer. I always find that if students are honest and open and communicate with the recruiter and say, hey, look, this is what I've got going on, typically employers are pretty receptive to that and will keep it open as long as they can. But for the students' sake, they must keep it open for 3 weeks. In Farm School Business, it's a little bit different because we do have a different recruiting relationship with some of those employers. So summer internships converting to full-time, that offer must remain open until October 15th. So this is if your student does a summer internship and they are offered a full-time position at the end of that internship, which is typically in August, and that hits just before the fall recruiting season. So if your student is a junior in the summer going into their senior year, if they have that full-time internship offer or full-time offer from their internship, they might feel pressure to accept that. I actually personally had that happen to me. I had a full-time offer after my internship my junior year, and my university did not have this policy in place, so I felt very pressured to accept that job offer. I'm no longer at that company, so I did not really get time to explore all of my options. So for Farm School Business students, we also do, it is different for accounting as well. So accounting typically does summer leadership experience programs, and oftentimes those are sophomore year that will then turn into an internship for junior year. So they will give that offer. The employer will give that offer at the end of their sophomore year in the summer for an internship the following year. And again, that kind of takes them out of the running sometimes for that fall recruiting. However, because it is an internship and they do need to know what spots are available for fall recruiting, they have mutually agreed to the August 15th deadline for that. So typically those experiences happen in May or June. So students, it's like a 3-day experience, and then after that, students will have a little bit of time to decide. And then for full-time and internship fall recruiting, October 31st or 3 weeks, whichever is longer. So students, any companies that is recruiting out of the Farmer School of Business, which is most employers, so It doesn't always have to be that your student is in the Farmer School of Business. They just have to have that recruiting relationship with FSB. And so what that means is that October 31st is the deadline that students have and employers have, or 3 weeks. So if an employer is just now interviewing with people and they say, okay, October 31st, that's not acceptable because it has to be at least 3 weeks then. And same thing for spring recruiting. So those dates are February 28th or 3 weeks, whichever is longer. Okay, so now going into, oh, and sorry, those policies that I just mentioned, those are both actually located on the Farmer School of Business website as well as our Career Center website for other reference. Okay, so sometimes the hardest part is just figuring out where to look for opportunities. I think with the, with everything being online and having so many different options, students oftentimes get overwhelmed. And these sites that I have up here are ones that I typically recommend to students, ones that I find to be incredibly beneficial. So Handshake is the first one that I will touch on, and that is our career management system here at Miami. For those parents who maybe have older students, we used to use CareerLink, which was, the vendor was Simplicity. So essentially we just switched vendors. It's very, very similar software. So with Handshake, the great thing about that is employers are looking specifically for Miami students. So sometimes employers will only post that job on Handshake at Miami. So that really limits the number of candidates that are able to apply and really gets your student viewed because they're just looking for those Miami students. So students can go on there to look at jobs. They can look at employers. They can follow employers. A lot of the times recruiter contacts are listed, so I always encourage students, if the recruiter contact is listed, reach out to them and talk to them about the opportunities. Especially with a ton of people applying to jobs, it's sometimes difficult for recruiters to sort through all of those resumes. So if you're reaching out to the recruiter, you're making their job easier. LinkedIn is also a really, really great place to go. So yes, you can look for jobs on LinkedIn. Yes, it is open to the entire world. So one thing that I like to point out with LinkedIn as well is you can actually see what Miami alumni work at companies that you're interested in. So I encourage students to connect with those alumni. I encourage students to chat with them about, even if they don't have a specific company in mind, or if they're a first year or a second year, just chatting with them to see what is out there and what opportunities are available. I actually teach a class of first year students, one of the UNB 101 courses, and I tell them, right now is when you need to start making those connections and start networking, because it's going to be a lot easier for someone to connect you with a job if they know you now, as opposed to 2-3 years down the road when they know that you're just looking for a job. So I think LinkedIn is a great place for that. Going Global, so Going Global is an international career search website. So not just for international students. Certainly this is very helpful for international students as they do that dual search in the United States and abroad. However, if you do have a domestic student who is looking to work and live in a country or abroad, Going Global is really great because it gives not only job opportunities, but it also gives career guides for different countries and cities. So if your student is thinking about, oh, I wonder what it's like to live and work in Australia, Going Global has a really great overview of, what does the visa process look like? What are some of the big companies out there? So that's a really great place for a student to start looking at that. AngelList is a job search site specifically for startup organizations. So startups typically are a lot, more demanding on students because of the nature of a startup. But it is a really great experience, especially if your student is graduating and not really sure what they want to do. I always recommend startups because they are amazing opportunities to kind of get your feet wet in a bunch of different areas. So AngelList has opportunities posted. There are even opportunities for students to become co-founders of organizations. So if your student is entrepreneurial in nature or looking to go down that path, AngelList is a really, really great way to get connected to those communities. And then the last job search site is Indeed.com. So yes, that is one of the main job search sites. It is a little tricky to work through because there is a lot of content on there. However, I do recommend to students, if they do apply to jobs on Indeed.com, if there's a recruiting contact, absolutely reach out to that recruiter because that makes their job easier, as well as establishes that relationship before them just kind of sifting through job applications. And then this last logo over here called Circle. So Circle is not a job search site per se. However, Circle is the platform that our newsletter is run through. So each week we blast out a newsletter to students. Your students should have received an email to customize this newsletter. So that's the really cool thing about Circle, is that students aren't getting all the content that we're pushing out. They're only getting the things that they're interested in. So if your student went in and customized their Circle account, they are getting, and say they customized it for jobs in higher education or higher education field, they're only getting content about that field. So it's really specific to what your student wants, what your student is looking for. Circle also pulls in job postings from Handshake, so that's really great. It's kind of the one-stop shop for your students to do some of that low-level searching for opportunities. Okay, and so I have mentioned Handshake quite a few times, and I wanted to do an overview of it just because it is new for us as well. So we migrated over to Handshake this year. June was the official migration. And we did this for a number of reasons, but it's a platform that's really user-friendly. It's something that I personally really enjoy. I like it a lot better than our old platform. And a lot of recruiters were already using Handshake with their other universities, so we found this as a great way to help our relationship with recruiters as well, because with Handshake, now they can post to just Miami if they want, but with their Handshake account, they can also post to other universities at the same time. So it makes it a lot more accessible for our recruiters as well. So for your students, all your students have probably received this in email format or in some sort of format throughout their time here thus far. But in order to use Handshake, you can do things like apply for jobs and internships, research organizations, as well as all the attendees that are at career fair. So when I meet with students, I really highly suggest to them that they take a look at who's going to be at career fair before actually showing up, and that attendance list is located on Handshake. Students can also view all of our workshops and information sessions. All of those are posted on there, as well as when recruiters are on campus. So recruiters come to campus for a variety of things like networking events, lunch and learns, coffee chats, tables in the Farmer School of Business. So all of these will be posted through Handshake as well, so that students can see that information. Students can also schedule mock and on-campus interviews via Handshake. So those practice interviews as well as the real deal, they can all do that through Handshake. And then lastly, of course, requesting a career coaching appointment is done through Handshake. There are 3 different ways that your student can access this site. So I think the best way is through My Miami. So they're already on their My Miami account, probably going to Canvas, going to Bannerweb or the Hub. We also have a button on there as well that says careers, so it is that one right in the middle there. That's probably the easiest way for a student to get to Handshake, but they can also go through our website, miamioh.edu/careers, and click on the job board button, which is on our homepage, as well as miamioh.joinhandshake.com. So all of your students automatically have an account with Handshake. It's just up to them to go in and add their resume as well as any other information that they want. So they have an opportunity to tag different skills that they're that they have or that they're interested in. They can follow employers, they can reach out to recruiters, they can make their profile public so that employers can actually find them. So if your student hasn't already, I highly encourage them to go in and customize their Handshake profile. And then just a little note on networking. So I think everyone can probably agree that networking is incredibly important. I'm finding in my daily work that it's becoming more and more important for your students to really start doing that networking. Oftentimes students, some students come in with a network, either through parents or family or friends, but a lot of times students don't necessarily always have that network, so we try to help work with them to provide that network. So informational interviewing is a concept that I talk a lot about with students. So this is really a student or anyone really, I do it in my own career as well, where I just reach out to somebody and I say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I would love to do what you do someday. Do you mind chatting with me about how you got there? So that's a really great way to start a connection. So it might not necessarily right away lead to a job or an internship, but say your student makes that connection with someone their first year of college, 3 years down the road, that person might remember them and say, oh, yeah, I remember you were interested in this field. Are you still interested? Here's an internship opportunity. So I know sometimes it's a daunting task for students. A oh my goodness, how do I just reach out to somebody that I don't know? But I always encourage them to tap into the networks that they do have. So using you all, parents, family members, asking, maybe sharing with your student who you might know in a field that they're interested in. Or even I tell them a lot of the times too, peer-to-peer. So sometimes they might not quite have the familial network, or their friends might not be as connected, but one of their peers might be, or their parents might be a CEO or something like that. So really just encouraging students to start making those connections and just start talking to people. Other ways to find people to informationally interview, LinkedIn is a great place. Like I mentioned, the alumni search tool. Miami alumni are really, really wanting to give back. We constantly interact with alumni who are asking how they can help. So I think informational interviewing is a really great way for them to share, one, their experience at Miami and how that has led them to where they are to get today, but also to kind of just help that student find their path as well. Job postings. So if there's a recruiter on there and your student might see a job posting their first year of college and they're not quite qualified for it yet because it's a full-time position, but I always encourage them to still reach out to that recruiter and say, even if it's just saying, hey, I know I'm not qualified right now, but I'm still interested in this field, I'm interested in your organization. Do you mind if I buy you a cup of coffee, or do you mind for a quick phone call? More often than not, people are receptive to that because people really like to talk about themselves and what they do. So I'm just encouraging your students to be open to that. Organizations of interest, so any kind of social organizations that students are doing on campus. I know their first point of doing that is to connect socially, but sometimes those lead into other opportunities. So I actually just had a group of panelists today talk to a lot of our UNV 101 courses this morning, and that was a big thing that they told them was, the things I got involved in college really helped me to build that network and build my confidence so that I could then go into interviews, or that I could then have a network behind me. Professional associations, same kind of thing. Career fairs, so even if they meet with a recruiter at career fair and either the job doesn't work out or something doesn't really happen with it, I still encourage students to stay in contact with those people, because in the world of recruiting, they kind of all know each other. They all go to the same events. So your student might not be a good fit for company A, but company B might be somewhere that company A recruiter might say, hey, I don't have a place for this person, but here's company B, what can you all do, because this person's great. So I always encourage students to do that as well. And also just kind of a quick note on what to even say to an informational interview to a recruiter or whatnot. Very, very cliche, but be yourself. Ask a lot of questions, so I always encourage students to ask what they want to know, obviously in a tactful manner. However, really asking those key questions. Also being a giver, so students I think sometimes don't realize that they have a lot to offer as well. So if you can say, hey, here's a solution I found to one of your challenges, I think that's always great to add that benefit. Or if your student is talking with somebody and they mention an area that they're interested in, your student can possibly connect them to one of their professors. So encouraging your students too to think of the value that they can bring as well. And then this is just a sample this is something that I typically show students when I meet with them, because oftentimes having that first ask is difficult. So this is just an example that I show them about, I'm reaching out to somebody. Obviously, I'm not a sophomore at Miami, but this is just something that I would say that you could use to reach out to an employer. So some of the things that I have bolded, so the first thing is the startup ecosystem. So that is me telling that person, I'm specifically interested in what you do, but even more specifically in that industry that you're in. And then you want to make sure that the student is letting the person know how they found them via LinkedIn, or if it's through a personal contact or friend of a friend, something like that, and then highlighting their role and why that's interesting to you. And then putting in that ask. So asking that person if they'd like to meet up. If they're not local, asking if they have time for a phone call or a Google Hangout. And then I always encourage students to add something small in about the company that person is working at. So in this example, I used People Foundry, which is a startup recruiting firm, a recruiting consultancy in Cincinnati. So I added that into my ask, like, oh, I'm interested in working at a progressive recruiting consultancy. So other things I've seen, like, oh, a Fortune 500 company or a top 10 startup in Cincinnati. So that's telling the person that you're talking to that, oh, this is an important, this is something, the research that this person has done on me, so I might give some more of my time because I see that they've done that research. And then also just tying it all up with, thanking the person and then looking forward to hearing from them soon. Okay, one question that we oftentimes get as well is students who have a not so great GPA. Certainly happens, life gets in the way. We typically recommend for students, if your GPA is below a 3.0, to not put it on the resume. However, to be prepared for the question of where is your GPA and why is it not on your resume. So certainly it's beneficial to have a good GPA. I think a lot of companies typically have a cutoff of some sort. However, there are ways around this GPA. I actually had a personal experience where my GPA was not a 3.7. It wasn't incredibly low. However, I was able to explain to the employer that because of the experiences that I've had, because of the networks I've created, it's actually kind of overshadowed my GPA. So the first thing is experiences. I always encourage students that it's not just about the courses you're taking. It's not just about the major that you're in. It's really about what you can do outside of the classroom as well. So a student might not have a great GPA, but they may have been the president of 3 different organizations. They may have done a lot of community service or were connected in other ways. And I think those are really incredible experiences to highlight on the resume. That also can be a point in cover letters as well. So students who typically have lower GPAs, cover letters where they can stand out because they can explain their experiences. They can talk about what they've been doing and how that is contributing to the person that they are. Also highlighting skills and focusing on that. So our professional organization in higher education here is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, otherwise known as NACE. So what NACE does every year is they survey employers about the top skills that they're looking for. So typically people think of, analytical skills or very technical skills. However, we find that the top skills that employers are looking for are really leadership skills, problem solving, being a team player. So employers really want to know, okay, are you someone who is teachable? Are you someone who is willing to learn and willing to take some of the concepts that you've learned in college? However, can you learn how to do it our way? So I think encouraging students to really focus on those skills and highlighting those throughout their resume and also interactions with employers is going to be really important. So understanding employers, so also understanding what they're looking for. So if your student has a not so great GPA, they might not want to work for a company that has a really stringent cutoff. So some employers have even like a 3.8 is their minimum GPA. That might not be the right fit for your student. So I think it's really important also to just understand the employer that you're going to, knowing the culture, knowing what it is that they're actually looking for, because if the culture and the environment don't mesh, then it might not be a great fit. And then the last one is network. So again, going off of what I just talked about, networking and building that network is incredibly important. Because if your student does have a lower GPA and their resume just goes through the applicant tracking system just like normal, chances are they might get kicked out because of that GPA, if there is a GPA requirement. However, if they knew someone at the company or they were able to network and talk with the recruiter and explain their situation a little bit more, sometimes that helps them get through the process. So it's very possible that, recruiters are people as well. They know that students have lives. They have things that happen. Sometimes something happens to where the GPA drops. It's certainly not uncommon and not unheard of. So I think as much as students are, can explain that to an employer and explain, this is what happened my first year. I had a really challenging semester, but here are the ways that I've overcome that. And look, my GPA used to be a 2.8, but now it's a 3.0. So I've actually grown. So sometimes encouraging students to really think about that as well and talking to people in those different networks that they're interested in. Okay, and before we do a little bit of a wrap up here, I just wanted to highlight the times that we have available for resume reviews as well as mock interviews. So again, the resume reviews are conducted by our career assistants, which are trained undergraduate students. So they are here almost every single day, even on Sundays from 4 to 8. So we did something new this year with being in Armstrong. We noticed that the traffic was probably going to be much higher, which it is, which is awesome. So we wanted to make sure that our career assistants were here for students outside of some of those classroom hours as well, because our office hours are 8 to 5, and we know that doesn't work for all students. So we do host resume reviews during those drop-in hours. So again, students can just drop in, don't have to make an appointment or anything. They can just come down to 45 Armstrong and meet with a career assistant. On the flip side, our mock interviews are also hosted every day, Monday through Friday. So again, we wanted to expand those hours a little bit more, so we are open until 8 p.m. for those on most days, and then Fridays is the standard 8 to 5. And your student would have to sign up for one of these mock interviews on Handshake, and we have them sign up just so that we can get them prepared for the right kind of interview that they want. And also, those aren't really drop-in because students do have to come full professional dress, just as if they were coming to an actual interview. Okay, and then just a little bit of what's next for your students and how you can support your students as well. So number one is customizing, so making sure that they're getting that Handshake profile customized, adding in their resumes on there and, tagging certain skills, things like that. Encouraging them to build their network, conducting informational interviews. As much as you all are able to help them with their network, I think that's certainly something that they should definitely be taking advantage of. So helping them and supporting them in building that network. And then updating their resume and LinkedIn profile and getting that reviewed by career assistants or a career coach. Attending employer sessions, career fairs and events, and workshops. So we still do have a lot of things going on this semester that students can take advantage of. So making sure that they're getting to those sessions, meeting employers, again, that all goes along with networking. Even just those employer tables, if they're just stopping in between classes, encouraging them get those business cards and reach out to those people on LinkedIn afterwards. That really goes a long way when they're starting to do their job search. And then practice mock interviews, incredibly important. And then also starting to think a little bit about the logistics of internships, particularly internships because full-time positions, somebody will be, obviously living in that city, but I know from my personal experience, again, I did an internship in Washington, D.C., and I was from Cleveland, Ohio, so I didn't really know anyone who lived out in D.C., and that was a big concern of mine was where was I going to live. And each internship is different, each city is different. I always find it's helpful to reach out to the universities in the area, so I actually ended up staying at George Washington University, which was really amazing because your student is on campus somewhere, very similar to how Miami does on-campus housing as well. So a lot of universities in the areas that your students will be interning might have that option available. I know in Cincinnati, Xavier University does have that option available for students. And then also having your students reach out to their internship coordinator. So a lot of the times the employer will actually help out with internship housing. So sometimes they will help out financially. I know Honda, for example, up in Columbus actually houses all of their interns together. So it's really more of that experience for them. So they rent out a block of apartments that the students pay a much like a prorated fee for. So it's a lot cheaper than if the student was just paying for that housing on their own. And then they're also getting the chance to live with their fellow interns. So it makes it a little bit more of an experience. So yeah, definitely thinking about how to check that out. Universities, the employers that students will be with. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is unpaid internships. So we as an office do not promote unpaid internships. We actually will not post unpaid internships on Handshake just because we strongly believe that your students are giving their time, giving their energy and their knowledge to these companies, therefore they should be compensated for their work. We're seeing less and less employers offer unpaid internships, so it's not a huge concern anymore. However, whenever I meet with students, I strongly advise against it with the caveat that sometimes it is a good experience. Again, for example, I did an unpaid internship when I was in college, and it wasn't really, it was in a nonprofit field, so sometimes those industries can't quite offer what you need, but they are really good experiences. So while we do not really promote it, and a lot of employers aren't even really doing that anymore, just another thing to consider. Okay, and I think that brings us to questions. No questions. Okay. Okay, so also there will be a recording of this webinar that will be posted online and sent out later today as well. And then we will also send out the slides from the session as well. Yeah, so the one question that we got was about Startup Cincy Day. So this will be hosted this year in on January 26th. And I guess just like a brief overview, so we don't quite have the schedule set yet, but we will be going down there and meeting with a panel of different players within the ecosystem. So somebody with a venture capital firm, somebody who's a founder, somebody who works at one of the incubators. So we really want to get students immersed in the culture and kind of know some of the terminology that they might be hearing throughout the day, as well as how vast the startup ecosystem is in Cincinnati. And then from there, we will actually go and visit 2 different startups down in Cincinnati. So some that we visited in the past are Listener, Tiller, Road Trippers. So getting to meet with the founders, getting to meet with other key personnel at those places. A lot of those startups also have Miami alumni who work there, so we'll get in contact with them as well. Yeah, so students will sign up for that. The link either will be posted on our website or is already on our website under programs. If not, we will also be doing email blasts. We also post it in our newsletter. So there are a variety of ways for students to kind of find out about that. I can also share the links with Mark, and he can post it on the parents page as well. Also, I want to throw up this slide too. So these are, again, our social media channels. So I highly, highly encourage students to follow them. I encourage you all to follow us. One of the channels I do want to highlight is Snapchat. So we actually allow employers to take over our Snapchat, which is a really cool experience for students. They're already on Snapchat, so if they see an employer posting about their culture, posting about their day-to-day, it's just a really great way for them to see what a company is like. So if anything, I highly encourage our Snapchat, and we won't follow anyone back. Don't worry about that. Okay. Thank you all.